Hi there, I'm Vincent Boss and I provide dating and self-improvement advice. And in today's podcast, we're going to be discussing dumper value decline. I provide audio coaching for breakup recovery, trying to get an ex back, attracting someone new, and life coaching. Visit www.dateme.tips for more details. Please check your spam and junk folders if you are expecting an email from me. So now let's get back into today's podcast. And today we are discussing dumper value decline. So if you have been dumped and want to try to get your ex back, you likely see your ex as all-powerful. You currently obsess and idolize them. But what if I were to tell you that most dumpers will feel a value decline over time? In today's podcast, I'll be giving you 3 points to consider regarding the dumper value decline. So let's get straight into this, and point number 1 is not all dumpers are the same. Now before we begin, please can I ask you to give this YouTube video a like if you're a dumpee. It would be great to see how many dumpees are listening in comparison to overall views. So please, if you're a dumpee, give this YouTube video a like and we can see how the comparison plays out. Thank you very much for that. So point number 1 is not all dumpers are the same. All dumpers end relationships because they lose romantic emotional attraction, but some dumpers end connections due to awful behaviour from their dumpee. Abuse and betrayal can sometimes leave a dumper feeling low value when they action a breakup, and hence it's important to say that today's podcast is not connected to dumpers who are in this position. We are instead focusing on dumpers who ended relationships due to things such as growing apart, long distance, petty arguments, and dumpy complacency. In essence, this podcast is about dumpers who are not betrayed or in abusive relationships. But even when we focus on the dumpers that we are prioritising today, we have to realise that every situation is unique, and therefore I have to put out generalised content, and therefore your dumper may not go on the exact path that I am describing. However, my years of research do suggest that dumpers who were not betrayed and who were not in abusive relationships are going to go through a value decline over time in some way, shape or form. So if you listen through today's podcast, you will see the generalised concept of what I believe is most likely to happen to your ex, the dumper. Now, if you would like specific, unique advice for your situation that isn't generalised, if you want breakup support, trying to increase the chance of getting your ex back, then you may want to consider my audio coaching service, where me and you can speak one-on-one about your specific, unique circumstances. Go to my website, www.dateme.tips, for more information about how I can become your coach and your teammate via my audio coaching service. So now let's get into point number 2 and the second point of today's podcast about dumper value decline. And point number 2 is power is given. So we first need to go right the way back when we explain point number 2 to when you and your now ex were in a loving relationship. So when you and your now dumper were in a long-term, loving, committed relationship, you both felt a high level of romantic emotional attraction for one another. And more importantly, in connection to today's podcast, the balance of power was fairly equal. Most couples who were going well, who were going strong, which you would like to believe your relationship was for a time, will be experiencing, generally speaking, a level of value which is very similar across the board. So if we were to see the scales of value, the scales of power, it would likely be fairly level out. When you two are going through your best times in your relationship, when you are deeply in love, this is the most likely concept. You both respect each other to a similar degree. Hopefully that is very high for both of you. And as we are explaining, this is where your relationship was at its strongest. The power, the value, the love, it was fairly equal between you both. Now, for various potential reasons, sadly, unfortunately for the dumpee, your now ex, the dumper, started to lose romantic emotional attraction for you. And over time, this would have got to a point of where they felt a very low level of romantic emotional attraction, and they started to consider life outside of your relationship. They started to wonder, is this relationship going to fulfill me long term? Is this relationship going to be what I want forevermore? Yes, I wanted it previously. Yes, I believed in it until very recently, but now I'm not so sure. And if and when the romantic emotional attraction hits the necessary low point, this is when somebody is likely to action a breakup and become the dumper. Now, at this point, we start to see a power shift. The power, as I was saying earlier, initially when you was in this relationship feeling good, feeling strong, it was fairly equal. But when your ex, the dumper, decides to action the breakup, this is when we start to see a power shift. Because most dumpees are going to fight their ground at this point. They're going to be arguing their point, saying they don't want the relationship to end. And by the way, I don't see anything wrong with this. You know, you need, at the time of a breakup, to be getting your point across and to see if you can reconcile things. So I don't see there's anything wrong with this. Breakups are emotional. At the time of a breakup, it's important to say your piece. You know, you need to be seeing if you can prevent this breakup from actually being actioned. So when your ex-dumper is trying to position their viewpoint, you need to be seeing if you can prevent this from taking place, if you believe that the relationship is worth fighting for. The problem you have is that if your ex-dumper becomes your ex-dumper and decides that this is actually the moment that they want to end it, they're not going to listen to what you're saying, they don't believe in the relationship right now, then unfortunately, automatically, they become the higher value individual. This is when they start to become the more powerful person because they got their way. You didn't get your way. That's the most basic way for me to describe it. They actioned a breakup. You didn't want it to happen. You put your viewpoint forward. It was ignored, and they have gone on their own journey. This makes them the powerful one. They got what they wanted. You didn't get what you desired. So unfortunately, you become, within this dynamic, the lower value individual. Now, this doesn't mean you are a low value person. It just means in the dynamic of a breakup, the dumpee becomes the lower value. And more importantly, in regards to today's podcast, you have less power. Okay? Your dumper becomes the powerful one. The dumpee has less power. So at this stage, we can already see that power is in the hands of a dumper. But regarding point number 2 of today's podcast, we're talking about power is given. So the level of power beyond this point will be dictated by the dumpee's behaviour. Now, I would strongly suggest that in most instances, a dumpee should never contact their ex again unless their ex contacts them first. There are a few caveats to that, but generally speaking, that is the best way forward. Again, going back to the early point of today's podcast, if you would like specific, unique advice, then you may want to consider my audio coaching service. You can find more details on my website, www.dateme.tips. But generally speaking, if you're a dumpee, you should, in most instances, never contact your ex again unless they contact you first after the breakup, post-breakup, when the dust has settled. And this is where we talk about power is given, because point number 2 in today's podcast is power is given. And what I mean by this is that if you don't follow this advice, if you're a dumpee who starts to text your ex, call your ex, knock on their door, wait outside where they work, pester your ex, chase your ex, beg, plead, reason, all of these things, what you are actually doing is decreasing your chance of success and increasing their power. You are giving them power. Power is given. They weren't more powerful than you within the relationship. Okay, they decided to break up. They became more powerful, but it still wasn't astronomically more powerful than you at that time. The power is given post-breakup, where you as a dumpee, if you decide to chase, pester, harass, beg, plead, you're basically saying that I'm not going to have a happy life unless I'm with you. And what that means is that they are powerful. You're basically saying, I can't be happy without you. So think about it. What does that tell the dumper? It tells them that they're all powerful. It tells them that they must be the king or the queen. Because if you can't have a happy life without them, they must be incredibly important. And this is where power is given. You're giving them the power. You're pushing them on that pedestal. And that's why it's so important that as a dumpee, you don't do this. I'm not saying be rude. I'm not saying be disrespectful. What I am saying, though, is when the dust has settled, You need to focus on your journey. You need to focus on you. You need to make sure that you are growing your confidence, that you are growing your self-esteem, and you're not inflating your ex's ego by giving them extra power, by chasing them, by begging them, by pleading them, by saying, I can't be happy unless you're with me. You're really inflating their ego, and that is not going to help you. Because, as I said towards the beginning of today's podcast, if you want to be in a happy, fulfilling relationship, likely speaking, you're going to have a fairly level value, a fairly level power on the scales of value and the scales of power. So you need to be leveling that out. You can't be chasing your ex and pushing them on the pedestal, because you're actually making the gap wider. The gap, the difference between you, the dumpee, and your ex, the dumper, is growing if you chase them. It's not closing in, and you need to close that gap. And you do that by focusing on you and not focusing on your ex. So now let's get into point number 3 and the final point of today's podcast about dumper value decline. And point number 3 is single life is hard. So today's podcast is about the dumper value decline. And you're probably thinking, well, so far, all we've been talking about is their value growing. Well, here is the magic moment where a dumper's value is likely to decline. And that is because single life is hard. Your ex, the dumper, has chosen to be single. Your ex, the dumper, has chosen to go down their own path. Your ex, the dumper, is now entering what I like to call the single honeymoon period. This is a period of time, 6 to 12 months on average, where a dumper will do their own thing. They will live their own life. They will experience, explore, and experiment doing the things that they felt they couldn't do within your relationship. Now, at first, things are all exciting. They're all new. They're all different. But over time, this will change. Single life is hard. It's very, very difficult to find a long-term compatible partner. That is why you're probably worried right now that you won't meet somebody better than your ex, which, by the way, you can. So if you don't get your ex back, please don't worry, because you can find somebody better. But you're probably worried. And you're worried because single life can be tough. It can be hard to find a long-term compatible partner. And therefore, it's the same rules for your dumper. Yes, they might go on a few dates. And I know you don't want to hear that, but the likelihood of them finding a long-term, forever compatible partner anytime soon is very, very unlikely. It often takes years of looking to find somebody who can be a forever partner. Now, of course, this isn't guaranteed, not a specific guaranteed length of time, but generally speaking, a dumper is going to be looking for more than a year if they're going to find somebody who potentially could be long-term. Sometimes it's 2, 3, 4 years. Sometimes they think they found somebody and then they haven't. Single life is hard. And once they come through the single honeymoon period and everything that once seemed exciting now feels quite boring, once they realise that finding a new forever partner is very difficult, this is when the dumper is going to be reflecting on that and thinking, I had somebody who wanted to be in a relationship with me. I ended that connection. They didn't want it to end, but I ended it anyway. And now I can't find anybody who loves me. I can't find anybody who wants to spend time with me. I can't find anybody who makes me feel as good as my dumpee once did. Maybe I made a mistake. And not only this, I've not heard from them in months, if not years. I don't know what they're doing right now. They're probably having the time of their life. Maybe they found somebody else. Maybe they are happier that I'm not part of their life. And this is when the value shift can start to take place. This is when the dumper value decline starts to kick in. Because they don't feel their life is as fulfilling as they'd hoped. They don't feel that they're any closer to finding a forever partner. But because you're not chasing them, they are wondering about you. Now, you might be thinking as a dumpee, well, I'm not with anybody, I'm finding it hard as well. But if you're growing every day, if you're living your life to the full, if you're making new connections, firstly, you might actually find somebody else who can be a long-term compatible partner. But secondly, even if you haven't, you're growing every day, you're improving, you're living your life to the full. You're doing all of these things that the dumper is very unlikely to be doing. Dumpers very rarely go through the self-growth a dumpee does, but they don't feel that they have to. And additionally to this, a dumper has gone through the single honeymoon period where they've kind of done their own thing, and now they've come out the other side and they're feeling lonely and sad. You as a dumpee felt lonely and sad, and now, hopefully, if you're following my advice, whether it's through podcasts or audio coaching, you're now growing every single day. So your value initially was quite low, but now it's getting higher. Your ex-dumper's value was quite high, and now it's starting to get lower. This is the dumper value decline. This is the power decline. This is when the almighty start to fall. because they felt they had their life sorted and perhaps thought that you didn't. But because they don't hear from you anymore, they have to fill in the blanks about what you're doing. All of that worry you have about your ex now, they will have about you in months or years to come. They'll be questioning themselves. Did I do the right thing? Should I have stayed with my dumpee? What are they doing? I miss them. I'm feeling lonely. And they are very unlikely to be going through the support that you're having. Dumpers are much less likely to be focusing on self-growth. They're much less likely to be seeking support. So they're likely going through this alone. They're likely doing this without a helping hand, and therefore the struggle can start to grow the romantic emotional attraction that they feel for you as they begin to miss you more. They miss the relationship, they miss the dynamic, they miss you. And if and when the romantic emotional attraction hits the necessary high point, this is when they'll likely reach out to you. This is when the dumper value decline has fallen to the point of where, if anything, you are the higher person on the scales of value now, and they might possibly start to chase you. If you believe that this podcast has helped you, then please consider buying me a coffee. The link to do so is in the description.